Do you know the thoughts and the ways of God? Here's a statement God gave to Israel through the prophet Isaiah. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. When I read this passage, these heart-searching questions come to my mind. Do I understand how God thinks? Am I walking in His ways? We'll come back to these verses, but first I would want to illustrate the difference between man's ways and God's ways. And to do that, we'll briefly consider the life of Jacob as an example. Esau and Jacob were twin sons born to Isaac and Rebekah. And prior to their birth, the Lord gave this revelation to their mother. 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger. Well, as it turned out in their birth, Esau was the older, and Jacob was the younger. And even though God's revelation spoke about the nations and the people groups that Jacob and Esau would ultimately father, it seems like they considered each other rivals, even while still living at home. By custom, Esau, being the oldest son, would carry responsibility for the family birthright. But Jacob found a way to exploit Esau's weakness and got the birthright transferred to himself. Once when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted." Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright now." Esau said, "I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me now." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank, and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Now years later, I think the sons were already in their 40s, their father, who was now blind, thought his death was imminent and wanted to give his final blessing to Esau, his favored firstborn son. He asked Esau to prepare and serve him his favorite food, and then he would bless him. But Rebekah overheard what was going on and quickly contrived a plan for Jacob, her favored son, to receive that blessing instead by deceiving Isaac. And though Jacob was briefly reluctant, he agreed. Not only would Jacob lie to his father and serve him a delicious meal cooked by Rebekah, but they also took pains to cover their tracks by Jacob wearing Esau's clothes and placing goat skins on his arms to make him feel hairy like his brother. So he went into his father and said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am. Who are you, my son?" Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Now sit up and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me." However, Isaac was uncertain at first and tried to verify the son's identity through his voice, through feeling him, and through smell. Finally, after some mixed signals, Isaac asked Jacob again. He said, "Are you really my son Esau?" He answered, "I am." Now listen to the blessing that Isaac mistakenly gave to Jacob. "May God give you of the dew of heaven, and of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you." Now, understandably, Esau was infuriated by Jacob's scandal and wanted to kill him. So Jacob fled from home and lived with his maternal uncle, whose name was Laban. But Laban was also a skilled manipulator, just like his sister Rebekah, and numerous times in the years to come, Jacob got the short end of the deal from his uncle. Nonetheless, Jacob now had a large family with a huge farm and lots of servants. It seems like God was fulfilling Isaac's blessing over his life. Finally, after living with his uncle for some 20 years, Jacob was fed up with Laban's tyranny, so he secretly took his family and headed back home. But no sooner was he free from Laban behind him than he was faced with Esau's army of 400 men ahead of him. There he was, stuck between an oppressive and deceitful uncle and a powerful, angry brother. What was he going to do? I believe it was here that Jacob turned from his ways of treachery toward the ways of God. This crisis brought him to realize that the blessing of God was more to be desired than the one he had stolen from his brother. He was now ready to give back the stolen blessing. To make peace with Esau, Jacob compiled a procession of approximately 580 animals as a gift for Esau. At least in type, he was giving back the fatness of the earth. As the two large groups approached each other, both Jacob and his servants referred to Esau, calling him Lord, and referred to Jacob as the servant. Not only did Esau hear this at least 10 times, but also Jacob bowed himself to the ground 7 times. Thus it was that he gave back his stolen lordship. Now backing up slightly, watch what happens the night before Jacob's dreaded encounter with Esau. With Jacob realizing that he was unable to keep the stolen blessing, Jacob wrestled with God for his blessing instead. Then the angel of God said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men, and have prevailed." Some 20 years before, Jacob got a blessing by calling himself Esau. But now his ways were changing. He would receive the blessing of God only upon the honest acknowledgement of who he was. I am Jacob. When Jacob exchanged his ways for God's ways, he no longer needed to fight for his rights. The blessing of God was sufficient for him. Here it was that God gave him a new name. In telling this story, I'm not trying to indicate that Jacob was a godless person during this time. In fact, God revealed himself to Jacob several times leading up to where I ended the story. But this only demonstrates how mercifully God works with people to bring them to the place of following his ways. You see, as religious people, we often like to imagine that we have God's favor simply because we advocate a certain moral agenda, or perhaps we diligently obey particular commandments, or maybe we recognize God's hand at work in our lives. We follow our ways while using God's words to bolster our cause. I think it's quite likely that Jacob and his mother thought that they had a divine justification for deceiving Isaac. After all, had not God revealed to Rebekah that the older shall serve the younger? Now I realize there are debates about both Isaac and Rebekah's intentions surrounding the story, and I can't get into all of that in this episode, but I do believe that the controlling and the manipulative way that Jacob took to receive a blessing is contrary to the ways of God. There's a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death, the proverb says. How would we describe the way that Jacob originally took? It was manipulative and dishonest. It was controlling and forcing an outcome. It was a fight for his perceived rights. He was playing the survival of the fittest law. If I can take advantage of somebody, I will. What it clearly was not was meekness, like God is meek. It was clearly not an expression of love. It was clearly not preferring others above himself. Another reason I've told this story is to try illustrating that, like Isaiah said, there are times when our ways are lower than God's ways. And when this is the case, we ought to forsake our own ways and diligently seek the ways of God. Sometimes people cite these verses from Isaiah 55 in such a way as to emphasize God's sovereignty in contrast to our finitude. They say things like, God's ways are far above our ways, we can't understand them. Such a message has often left me with a sentiment that God is somewhat inaccessible to humans, that He is far away and indifferent to our lives. But this is a pitiful interpretation of the passage in Isaiah. Listen to the context. I should read the whole chapter, but for the sake of time, let's just read the immediate context. Seek the Lord while He may be found. Call upon Him while He is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return to the Lord, that He may have compassion on him, and to our God, for He will abundantly pardon. Notice that the wicked are asked to forsake their way and their thoughts. Why? Verse 8, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. God is not trying to make us feel like His thoughts and ways are inaccessible to us. No! God is lamenting our ways and thoughts. He's calling people to forsake their ways and thoughts and turn instead to the thoughts and the ways of God. That is what this passage is so warmly inviting. In an earlier episode, we looked at how the Israelites as a new nation continually rebelled against God. And God's diagnosis of this to the psalmist was short and profound. They always go astray in their heart, and they do not know my ways. In other words, their thoughts and their ways are not God's thoughts or ways. They had an evil and unsanctified view of God, which kept them blinded to the ways of God. However, God mercifully sent prophets who instructed the people about the character and the will of God, and every bright spot of their history is characterized by those who sought to know the ways and the thoughts of God. When God raised up David to be the king, He testified, I have found in David the son of Jesse a man after my heart, who will do all my will. What does a man after God's heart look like? Well, it did not represent a person who was faultless. In fact, David had several very grievous failures in his life. It did not represent a person who was independent and strong. The Psalms frequently show how dependent and weak David felt about himself. But it did represent someone who sincerely desired to know the thoughts and the ways of God. Consider these excerpts from Psalm 25 as an example. Make me to know your ways, O Lord. Teach me your paths. Good and upright is the Lord. Therefore He instructs sinners in the way. He leads the humble in what is right, and teaches the humble His way. All the paths of the Lord are steadfast love and faithfulness, for those who keep His covenant and His testimonies. Who is the man who fears the Lord? Him will He instruct in the way that he should choose. The process of sanctifying the Lord God in our hearts involves seeking and learning to know His thoughts and His ways. Let us claim David's prayer as our own. Make me to know your ways, O Lord. Teach me your paths. Amen.